Today's video will be providing practice guidance for the second etude in the Voxman Selected Studies book. This one also in the key of C, written, and you'll see that the composer's name is Bohme. Oscar Bohme was a Russian Jewish trumpet player and composer. He wrote a really fine trumpet concerto, a full 3-movement long work for trumpet and orchestra, trumpet soloist and orchestra, and there are many shorter pieces for trumpet and piano by Oscar Bohme. He's actually a composer that I'm particularly fond of. This etude, as with most of the keys, what Voxman supplied us with is one page of music that's lyrical or song-like in nature, and a second page in contrasting style, usually involving more articulation, and maybe involving more technique, more physical challenge. This etude, you'll notice that you see this same articulation over and over again. You hear short, long, with an accent on the second note. Tit-ta, tit-ta, tit-ta. If you make this sound just on air, that's what it feels like to me as I'm playing through it. Making that sound actually produces the tongue stroke that makes the appropriate articulation for this etude. That articulation should sound a little bit like a fanfare, a little bit martial or military, but also somewhat playful. It's not something that we want to play in a really heavy, severe way. The opening passage is basically a fanfare in the key of C, all played open on the horn. No fingers needed. So in order to make this and other fanfare figures that are similar throughout the page, in order to make them all sound good, just make sure that before you practice the thing, you play this lip slur. G to the top G. You should play that lip slur several times, making sure each note is in tune and vibrant. You should play it with either a digital tuner in front of you, centering each note, or even better, with a drone. If you go to YouTube and you just put, in this case, drone in B flat, we're in our written C, but the piece is in concert B flat. Then what you'll get is a bunch of video options where either a cello or some other low instrument is playing a sustained pitch that you can tune over. That's hugely valuable. It's probably done more than anything to improve my own intonation. And this etude is really well suited to that particular kind of tuning. I'll insert a video probably here that demonstrates what I'm talking about. In that video that I'm going to insert, you'll hear a drone that's just being produced by my phone. I'm playing a drone through YouTube on my phone and place the telephone right next to the recorder so that it would sound loud for you. And then I play through the first phrase, stopping on various pitches to let them center and tune against the drone. Usually I would put the drone in an earphone in my ear, because usually I don't have access in my practice space to a really loud speaker. If you have a way to project it in a speaker in the room that you're practicing in or recording in, that's a really great resource. Otherwise, it works adequately just to put it in an earphone in your ear so that drone is really present in your ear and you can center every pitch over that. The two drones really that I will demonstrate are concert B flat, your written C, and concert F, your written G. So the first note and the fifth note of the key that we're in. Those two drones allow us to tune different notes of the scale. The drone in B flat allows you to tune the C major, the written C major arpeggio. And the drone in F, concert F, our written G, allows you to tune the notes that are between those notes, G, B, and D. drone as well. And you'll hear that on the recording. Okay, so you should play that slur. You should play the various forms of that slur over 4 notes. Just improvise up and down that series of 4 notes and get those as easy as you can make them. As we did with the last etude, buzzing a glissando between the 2 Gs. Is a necessary practice as well. You should do that. So before you can really, in order to get the articulation working the way it should be, just on the single notes of that arpeggio, just on the notes of the first 2 bars, you should play that articulation pattern. Putting the emphasis on the second note. Sometimes I was more successful and sometimes less successful just now in doing that. T, T, T. Get yourself in the habit of putting that accent on the second note where it belongs. And again, improvise up and down that. With the tuner, you'll find that the top space E will tend to want to be flat. So give it lots of vibrance to lift the pitch, to buoy the pitch. And the G at the top of the staff will tend to want to be really sharp. You're probably going to need to practice bending that pitch. Bending it below the center, and then coming back up to center. Often the sound that results from doing that is better than the sound you started with. Make the bend slow and crescendo into the bend. When you let up on the dynamic and relax the air, the pitch will drift back up to center. You won't have to lift it back up. If bending that G is impossible for you, you may have to start on a C and work your way up. High school and early college students, the high G is really sharp, and it won't sound right to you when you put it in tune. When the tuner tells you it's in tune, it is in tune, or at least it's basically where it should be, but your ear is trained to hear it sharp. So you'll have to get used to hearing it where it's really supposed to be. Okay, so once you have that articulation working and all the notes are, and you can play that articulation pattern, T, 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 with good intonation on each of the opening notes, then you can play it as written. And try to make a subtle crescendo to the top note, of course. The top note is the peak of the phrase. Now on the descent, now you have a descent of 2 octaves scale-wise. Most players at like All-State auditions that I've heard are not super successful with this descent. They tend to get low, their intervals are slightly too wide, so by the time they get down to the low G, it's flat and flabby. The low G just doesn't sound good. The thing to do to fix that is, both with the drone and with the tuner, stop on the strong beats of each bar. So tune the top G, then in the downbeat of the 3rd bar is a C. Put a fermata over that for the moment and just tune that note. Then the next strong beat on the 3rd beat is an F. Tune that note. Then the 4th bar, the 1st note, is a B. Tune that note. So you do this. If those downbeats are nicely centered, you'll find that they don't feel as far apart as you'd expect them to feel. Each of those notes is a 5th lower than the last one. And then if the downbeat of your 4th bar, that B, is in tune and nicely centered, then you have a shot at playing the low G in tune and nicely centered. You'll have a shot at having it sound like the quality of sound that a good vocalist gets in the bottom part of their voice, but not on their very lowest, not in the very lowest part of their voice. Think of an alto singing at the bottom of the staff. And then make sure the B and the G are the right distance apart. You might add an A in between them to get just to create another passing tone. Sounds pretty good, and it's in tune. Now, that 4th bar is arpeggiating G major. B, D, G, B, D, G is 3, 1, 3, 5, 1 in G major. That being just simply an arpeggio, it's a good idea to loop that arpeggio. Both to get it in tune and to make it feel easy and make it feel more like the center of your voice. Okay. The first indication we have at the top of the page is à la brève. That means the composer wants you to feel the etude, feel the rhythm in 2 instead of 4. So instead of, I'm going to conduct 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Da 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 da. Right? What he wants for us to feel is 1, 2, 1, 2. Da 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 da. So faster tempo is implied by à la brève, almost always. We won't be playing it that fast in our practice right now because your first priority is not speed. We're going to learn to play the thing with ease and with great intonation, constantly centered in the sound, and with great rhythm. And then, if all of that's in place, speeding it up is really not going to be any problem. You'll be able to speed it up without too much drama. Okay, the second line begins with leaps from G to D to the top G. Notice that's marked piano. We've just come out of so the transition is to a dainty sound, a sound that's graceful and light. The first phrase marked risoluto, meaning to play with resolve, and forte. So the first phrase was a heavier, more military, more fanfare-like kind of playing. The decrescendo at the end of the first line is the moment when we shrink things down to a light, responsive, delicate way of playing. Again, like the first line, you should practice this. You should go. Then also take each of the intervals individually and repeat it soft, making it sound as pure as you can. All that remains is to put that together. Now keep in mind that the A you're about to leap to in the third bar is only a step higher than the G you just played. In fact, leave the B out for a moment and just do this. So you feel the return to the same general area as the G. You can play the A a little louder than the previous G, and then relax as you descend. Start that crescendo at the end of the second line a little later than it's marked. By the time you get to the E, you can have a little bit of additional volume. Realize, too, that in the third bar, if you were to play that A, G, and F down an octave, what you'd get is, right? It's just a scale, but they inverted it. They threw the A up an octave. And you'll probably find that playing the lick with the A, G, and F down an octave makes it slot more nicely for you in the upper octave. I haven't talked about slurring yet at all. Everything we've looked at in the first two lines will benefit from alternating between playing it slurred and playing it tongued. This third bar of the second line center things out and give you a more sensitive sense of what the air has to do as you move across that wide contour. In the other direction, you can add more tongues to any of the licks in this etude. By that I mean, or even, by the time you've played 4 tongues on each note, you've probably found the center of the note. Practice the crescendo in the 4th bar starting on the E. Get the E really centered. So that you're sure the audience is going to hear that change. I'm probably achieving a forte at that point. So I'm going from piano to forte at the end of the 2nd line. The 3rd line is another set of arpeggios outlining chords that if you take each 4-note group and you play those notes on the piano, you'll find that you get a fairly sonorous chord. That's a D major chord with and the C is the flat 7th, the lowered 7th that belongs to a dominant chord. The next one is a G major chord going 3 5 1 3 5. So all of these again, as I've said with every arpeggio, you should loop them. Both slurred and tongued. With the first one, the first bar of the 3rd line, you should repeat the interval of a 4th between the A and D several times. That's the interval people will either play out of tune or miss. Likewise in the 3rd bar, make sure to tune and center that. For the first 3 bars of this line, be aware that you're arriving on D a lot. And that D, if you keep the feeling and the short-term memory of that, the D on the 2nd to top line in your system, then that can act as an anchor for you so that you stay oriented and centered. The last bar doesn't have that D in it. So far, I'm playing rather slowly and breathing between bars. When you play this anywhere close to tempo, you'll surely be able to get through it in one breath. I'm starting the 3rd line a little softer than I ended the 2nd line. The crescendo at the end of the 2nd line goes up to almost forte. I step back just a little bit to start the next line. That way I have some room to grow through the whole 3rd line. Make sure that there's as little gap as possible after the half notes in the 1st bar of the 3rd line and the 2nd bar of the 3rd line. Don't do this. No. And then you'll breathe after the high G. Practice the interval between the G at the top of the staff giving yourself a little time between the 2 notes. When you breathe before the 4th line, you have you have a little time to release your face, to relax, and let go of all kind of tension everywhere. Because to play the low C in a way that sounds full and open, you probably have some tension to let go of after that G at the top of the staff. Now, the first bar of the fourth line is spelling a diminished arpeggio. So what that means is each note is a minor third from the last note. Each of these notes has two unplayed notes between them. Between the C and the E flat on the fourth line, you're skipping over a C sharp and a D, right? You play a C, you're skipping over a C sharp and a D, you play the E flat. Between the E flat and the F sharp, you've got an E and an F that you're skipping over, and then you play the F sharp. Between the F sharp and the A, you've got a G and a G sharp that you're not playing. You're skipping from F sharp to A. So these intervals are equidistant all the way up to the high A. So first get the bottom four notes to feel really comfortable. Then the top four notes. You notice I'm triggering the A at the top of the staff. Almost everybody needs trigger in order for that note not to be sharp. It's worthwhile just to take the C, E flat, and F sharp, the upper C, E flat, and F sharp, get those notes to feel very close together and smoothly connected. Then the A won't feel high to you. It'll feel closer, especially if you add a little bit of trigger. Okay, then you put the whole thing together. And then I play it back down so that you have a really nice sort of template for what that pattern feels like. It's a little strange probably to you to play a passage that has both a flat and a sharp note in it. But you'll see that in your life. You'll get used to it. Okay, the second bar of the fourth line is just that same lip slur that we've seen every time we've arpeggiated C major up to the G. Make sure that lip slur works for you. If you have to start on a lower finger position, play that slurred very slowly so that you have complete control over it, and buzz it on the mouthpiece as well. On the descent in the second bar of the fourth line, leave out the E once. So you feel yourself relax back down to that nice, comfy second line G. Then you can add the leap back up to the E. Now, here's another situation in the third bar of the fourth line where the E, D, and C have been thrown up an octave. If those notes were down an octave, if we made this as smooth as it could be with the same note names, instead of getting You get. So do practice that a few times that way, with all the notes in the same octave at the bottom of the staff. You can also do the same smoothing out of the line by putting the F sharp, E, and D up an octave. By the time you do that, you'll have that bar really firmly in your ear. And you'll be able to put it together as written. Do play a glissando between the low D and the E. Because the D to E, a leap of a ninth, is unfamiliar for most young players' ears. As you decrescendo on that G at the top of the staff, this is the end of the fourth line, the pitch will want to come back up on you. So keep blowing down into the pitch to hold it in tune. That's challenging to do. It's a great thing for your chops to be trained to do. Really, you should do some decrescendo and crescendo exercises on the notes at the top of the staff. Still either with the tuner or better yet over a drone. It's challenging to do. Okay, at the end of the fourth bar, that decrescendo takes us back into the kind of delicate, lighter playing that we were doing in the second line. Again, on each of the notes that you have to articulate here, practice the articulation, this thing. See how soft you can do it. Play it softer than you intend to perform it. You notice, as I play softer, I tend to go sharp, and I tend to crack the note from above. Da-dee-ah, da-dee-ah. So playing soft requires you to stay anchored in the sound. Don't get above the center of the sound. Before you add that articulation, you should also just slur through those first two bars of the fifth line. Then you can overlay the tongue. You should play these two bars softly down an octave so that you hear where all the pitches are, the rhythm is perfect, and so that you feel what it's like to produce it in a relaxed way. After those two bars, you can start to grow again into your descent down to the low G. good lick to work on from the back forward. First, start on the low D in the last bar, fourth bar of the fifth line. Make that sound good. Then you can add, let's say, 2 notes. Okay? When that sounds good, you add 3 more notes. Now we've learned the lick back to where the leaps start. You've got right? First practice the D to G interval. Then practice the F to B. Then we can tack that on to the end of the lick. Now we're really ready to play the last 2 bars. Make the last note really solid and long. The 6th line down is the first time we don't have staccato markings on the 8th notes. So make that difference evident. That's not an accident by Mr. Bohme. It's marked forte, so we're keeping the volume, maybe even increasing the volume from the previous line. And that takes a little courage because you're leaping across greater distances, greater intervals. But this slur is probably not unfamiliar to you. This is the first 3 notes of the 6th line down. You should play that slur several times. And when you add the tongue, make sure the first C is firm and fat. The indication risoluto at the beginning of the etude, that's the style you should be playing in at this moment. No problem. Then, you should play that slur as well, skipping over the C, skipping from G to E, not playing the C. See if you can do that. And then, with the tongue added, do this. Keeping the low C the loudest note. In the 3rd bar, let's first play the upper C to G interval. You find it easier to pop the G out if the C is not sharp, if you stay down in the center of your 2nd space C. All right, now add the low C. And you can do that as slowly as you need to feel like you're finding each center. Then we add the tom. And we put it all together. the end of the second bar through the rest of the line in line 6 is the same as it was in the first phrase at the top of the page. In the 7th line, we have a really similar start to what happened in the second line. So again, we're going to play in that softer, more delicate way. But this time, the material at the beginning of the phrase in the second line keeps going and the intervals become wider. Here and also in that second line, don't leave too big a gap between the accented note and the following staccato note. Don't do this. Make sure you play through the whole value of the long note. Let's start work on the 7th line down from the last bar of that line. So 7th line down, 4th bar. The first 3 notes are. Play those 3 notes with 4 articulations each. Make sure you know where those are. Let's give the same treatment to the first 3 notes of the 3rd bar. And then the first 3 notes of the 2nd bar. Now we haven't addressed the other leap in each bar, which is the descending leap. That's the second half of the first bar. In the second bar, it's G and C. In the 3rd bar, it's E to B flat. And then the 4th bar, it's F to C. So that isolates all of those intervals. Then maybe you can work on it a bar at a time. That's the first bar. And in the 6th line of the etude, notice that the primary note is the one that occurs on the 2nd and 4th quarter note beat of the bar. So if I only play that note, in the first bar it's a D, the 2nd bar it's a C, 3rd bar is a B flat, 4th bar is an A. So the internal line here is play that several times, and then add the real notes that are there. forte. So, because the crescendo will go through the entire first bar of the second to last line. In order to practice the octave leap in the first bar of the second to last line, I might do something like this. So I have time to center the upper note. It's a good idea to do that legato as well. It gives you less time to find the octave leap. Because there's no space between the note for my face or air to have time to change. Then it's actually easier to play short. Most players find that the second and third bars of the second to last line are easier to play than the last bar, the descending arpeggio. Getting back down to the low C and having the low C sound full and easy it requires you to let go of whatever you did to get up to the high G. Make sure that the interval between the bars, the top of the staff G in the second bar to the downbeat of the third bar, an octave below, make sure that interval's good. And make sure the interval between the last note of the third bar and the first note of the fourth bar is also good, G to C. For the last bar of the second to last line, first play it without the second note of each eighth note pair. Just play the first note of each eighth note pair. I'm going to add the G at the top of the staff in the previous bar. Make sure that comes out easily. And then you'll be able to add the notes that we left out without much trouble. Then I'll play it with even eighth notes. You'll be starting the last line from a nice, rich, deep, low C. Remember that the C at the bottom of the staff and the B at the bottom of the staff are in really exactly the same place for your chops and your air. You don't have to make any change at all except push down the second valve. Just feel how close together the B and the C are. Because if you make a descent in your body to get that B to come out, it'll throw you out of center. So, once again, just like you did in the last bar of the second to last line, in the first bar of the last line, leave out the second note of each pair of notes. Instead of playing, do this. Maybe buzz that too. You may find that's hard for you to hear. arpeggio from the F down to the E in the second bar of the last line. Be particularly careful to get the E down in pitch where it belongs. I usually need to trigger that E, especially if I'm descending down to it, the first line E. Okay, so the last bar of the second to last line and the first bar of the last line require a lot of attention. Do not neglect those two bars. And don't let it throw you off that you're making a line break. If your eyes are late to get to the last bar, it's inconvenient that they made a line break in the print right when you're making kind of unfamiliar leaps. The second bar of the last line is just another arpeggiation in the key of C. 3, 5, 1, 5, 3, 1, 5. By now that'll be very familiar to you because it's occurred many times already in the etude. It would be good to do that in connection with the last half of the first bar. Loop that until it feels like one thing. The last two bars of the etude, be sure to slur and do this to the rhythm. Make the bottom note of each leap longer. Practice doing that slowly and slurred. Add the articulation later. Notice that in the second to last bar, on the third and fourth beats, you have the same notes that you have on the second and third beats of the third bar of the fifth line. So go to the fifth line, look at the third bar, and you've already practiced this. Those are the same four notes as at the end of the piece. So what you have in the last two bars is a series of descending fifths. You should play the last two bars down an octave. This will also make you practice playing low Gs. You may feel like playing something like that down an octave doesn't connect or help with playing up an octave. I promise you it does. It gets the finger and tongue coordination aligned, and it puts the lick in your ear firmly. Make sure it sounds good down an octave. Make sure the low Gs sound good and not too flabby, that they respond when you articulate on them, that they have nice clean fronts, even though you're never going to perform it in that octave. Okay, then when you work on the upper octave, you can also just repeat each of those wide intervals. So the first descending fifth is A to D. And you'll need to get used to the slide going out for the A and coming back in for the D. You can't afford to have the first slide out on the D second line from the top of the staff, because that's already a flat note, even before you put the slide out. Then F to B. D to G. Then you can start to put them together. That kind of slurred work is really important, and it'll benefit all of your trumpet playing, not just these 2 bars. With this entire etude, it may help you to go from slurring to tenuto, long tonguing, very connected tonguing, and then to the next step of staccato tonguing, light, short tonguing. So those 3 steps would be for the last 2 bars here. Keeping a slow tempo is going to pay off. You may feel like I'm practicing ridiculously slow right now, but this is actually how I practice this sort of thing. Speeding it up is not a big deal. Once it's working really well at a slow tempo, I'm playing all the articulations, all the dynamic markings, all the phrase shapes, all the musical ideas at a really slow, easy tempo, then speeding it up is the least of my troubles. That said, any flaws that remain at a slow tempo will immediately be much, much worse when I try to speed it up, and those will be the things that prevent me from speeding up the study. All right, I hope this has been a helpful session for you. Practice the piece in small chunks. 4-bar phrases would be fine for a 20-minute practice session. If you make 4 bars better, you've done your work, and you'll get there. And just be aware that as you're playing and as you start to exert yourself as a player, your tendency will probably be to play heavier and tighter and to get above the center of the notes in practicing something with a lot of articulation like this. So just be aware of that, notice when it happens, and adjust. Release your tension, stand up, stretch, sit back down, and if you practice seated, maybe you practice standing. And return to your best sound picture of what this etude should do and should sound like.